In late July 1876, a strange event took place in March Township, Ontario, a historic district bordering the Ottawa River, located at the present western outskirts of Ottawa, Ontario. According to an article in the August 4th, 1876 issue of Kingston, Ontario's weekly British Whig, a group of children had decided to go berry picking the previous week off what was called the Arnprior Road, almost certainly a section of the now forgotten Brockville and Ottawa Railway near the town of Arnprior. A passage in a later article indicates that most of these children may have been girls. While they foraged, the children spotted what the paper described as a man in a perfectly nude condition, standing on the top of a hill, his body being covered with hair and his face covered with a long beard. The man stood looking at the children for some time and appeared anxious to join in with them. He stood looking at them for 15 minutes and then slowly descended the side of the hill and disappeared in the woods. The article declared that the story was no childish invention, as a 15-year-old local boy named Bradley gave a clear and sober account of the experience to a reporter. The story is fully believed by the people around the place, the article concluded, and several searches have been made to try and discover the Wildman's retreat. Despite the willingness of the local populace to take the children's report at face value, a succeeding piece in the August 7, 1876 issue of the Ottawa Daily Citizen casts some doubt on the encounter, stating that it has since leaked out that one of the male members of the party was playing a practical joke on the girls, and by wrapping a buffalo robe around his manly form and hiding in the bushes, succeeded in starting the above rumor. Prank or not, Wildman sightings made while berry picking recur with surprising frequency in the annals of Canadian Sasquatch encounters. In an 1884 article for the Victoria British Colonist, an Anglican missionary named Reverend John Booth Good claimed that Thompson Indian berry pickers, while camping in British Columbia's Fraser Canyon in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s, were sometimes visited in the dead of night by something that seemed half man, half beast. In his famous 1929 article for Maclean's magazine, Indian agent J.W. Burns included the story of an elderly Chehalis man named Charlie Victor, who found a Sasquatch cave while picking salmon berries in the Lillooet Mountains near Yale, BC. In his 1961 book, Abominable Snowmen, Legend Come to Life, cryptozoology godfather Ivan T. Sanderson included the testimony of Charles Flood of New Westminster, BC, who claimed to have encountered an 8-foot-tall, man-like creature in a huckleberry patch in the North Cascade Mountains in 1915. In a sworn statutory declaration, Flood declared that this mysterious animal, which stood on 2 legs and was covered in light brown fur, pulled the berry bushes with its one hand or paw towards him and put the berries in his mouth with the other hand or paw. In his various books, published in the 1960s and 70s, Canadian Sasquatch researcher John Willison Green included the testimony of John Bringsley, who described his frightening 1960 run-in with a huge silver-furred wildman while picking huckleberries in the Columbia Mountains not far from Nelson, BC. And in his 1973 book, The Sasquatch File, Green included the account of a woman who, while picking berries near Rocky Mountain House, Alberta, the previous summer, realized with a thrill of horror that she was being watched by a hairy 9-foot-tall wildman, half concealed by the brush. It may not be out of place here to mention that American researcher David Paulides, the notorious chronicler of mysterious missing persons cases in the United States and Canada, has identified berries as one of a handful of peculiar motifs common to vanishings which defy rational explanation. Although Paulides has been justly criticized for omitting or overlooking important details from many of his investigatory reports, he has decidedly demonstrated that a curious number of unsolved disappearances indeed involve the picking and consumption of berries. In a previous piece, we touched on Paulides' coverage of the respective disappearances of George Wanke and Jack Pike, both of whom vanished in 1935 while picking berries in southern Manitoba. There are similar cases, which the former police officer included in his 2019 book, Missing 411 Canada, for none of which, it must be mentioned, are there any indications that wildman abductions were to blame. To give one example, Paulides reported on the disappearance of 13-year-old Eva Hall, who vanished while picking huckleberries on August 15, 1932, in the woods near the rural settlement of Poverty Bay, Ontario, about 43 kilometers northeast of Parry Sound, in the center of the 120 kilometer square of wilderness bounded by Georgian Bay, Lake Nipissing, Lake Muskoka, and Algonquin Provincial Park. Although Paulides stated that the girl was never found, a number of contemporary Canadian newspaper articles indicate that she wandered into a farm near the neighboring settlement of Magnetawan after 3 days in the bush, hungry and exhausted, but alive. She explained to reporters that she left the girls with whom she had been picking berries in order to get a drink from a nearby stream, but was unable to find her way back to the group. I have written extensively about the relationship between berries and missing people, Politis wrote in a summary of Hall's case. The most dangerous berries to pick are, without a doubt, huckleberries. I have no understanding why huckleberries represent the most dangerous berry, but people picking these berries who disappear are rarely found. The next wild man to make the Canadian news was a violent hairy giant said to live on a mysterious Ontario isle, which 1883 papers called Pretty's Island near Pembroke. Pembroke, Ontario is a city on the southern banks of the Ottawa River, about 113 kilometers upriver from March Township, the site of the previous encounter. Back in 1883, it was a newly incorporated town on the same rail line as Arnprior. The only medium-sized islands near Pembroke are adjacent Eel Morrison and Cotman Island, which lie in a lazy stretch of the Ottawa River known as Allumette Lake. Across the lake is massive L'Île aux Alouettes, and about 40 kilometers downriver is the similarly sized L'Île du Grand Calumet, both of which have retained their names since at least the early 18th century. The only Pretty's Island in the area is Pretty's Island, spelt Tties, south of what was then the village of Carleton Place, on a tributary of the Ottawa called the Mississippi, about 45 kilometers southeast of Arnprior. Whatever the identity of the island in question, it seems certain that it was located near the Ottawa River, just upriver from the city of Ottawa, not far from the March Township incident of July 1876, suggesting that the wild man of southern Ontario might be more than just a juvenile hoax. According to a series of newspaper articles published in late July 1883, Pretty's Island near Pembroke was home to an 8-foot-tall, hair-covered wild man who had been spotted flitting through the bush. An article in the Montreal Gazette averred that 2 craftsmen who were bold enough to go in search of him had a narrow escape from being killed, one of them having his arm fractured by the giant. The hairy giant alluded to in this brief report is somewhat reminiscent of Old Yellowtop, a huge hairy creature allegedly spotted further to the north, in the Canadian Shield surrounding Cobalt, Ontario, on 3 different occasions throughout the 20th century, named for the shock of yellow hair that witnesses say crowned its head. 2 years after the Pretty's Island sighting, another wild man was spotted lurking on the outskirts of Sewell, a rural settlement about 60 kilometers southwest of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Some of the farmers in this vicinity proclaimed an article in the September 24, 1885 issue of the Manitoba Weekly Free Press, have become greatly excited over what they term a wild man, who was running at large, and is represented as being covered with long hair and having a long tail. Rather than Old Yellowtop, or the metamorphosed humans described in an earlier segment, this creature strongly evokes a large, mysterious North American primate we have discussed in a previous piece, a monkey-like creature known to the Otna Indians of southwestern Alaska as the tailed one, and referred to by the woodsmen of Appalachia as the devil monkey. Considering the location of the 1885 Sewell sighting, it is worth recounting an alleged devil monkey encounter supposed to have been made in the mid-2010s by 2 Cree sisters from Jackhead, Manitoba, while driving on the Manitoba Highway 6. This encounter was documented by a young cryptozoologist named Thomas Morgan of Kawartha Lakes, Ontario, on his website superbugtom.com. While passing by a small body of water called Devil's Lake between Lakes Winnipeg and Winnipegosis, about an hour's drive south of Grand Rapids, Manitoba, the girls watched a large monkey-like creature cross the highway in front of them. The sisters described the creature as being 4 feet tall and having brown hair, large shoulders, a sloped back, and a tail. In the next section of this series, our research into the wild men of the Canadian press merges with the work of classic Canadian Sasquatch researchers like J.W. Burns and John Willison Green, transporting us to Canada's west coast, the birthplace of Canadian Sasquatch folklore.